How's it going, everyone, and welcome to the Ultimate Gaming Room. This is your host and curator, Jason Dixon, logging on. There she is back there. A spirit is looking at me, the spirit of beauty. My Tiffany doll. Her essence follows me. Reminds me of the treasure hunt mission. I'm going on a mystery here to check it out. Going on a treasure hunt through a cave. I hear some. Let's check it out. Oh, it's my Tiffany doll. This is beautiful. The best piece of treasure I ever found in my life. Oh yeah, look at you. As good a booty as I can find. I'd buy that for a million booties and more. It's all the booty I need. Perhaps I can use more than that too. Well, she's totally good enough for me. Oh, yes. Best piece of booty ever. Okay. Tonight, I'm going to be going over one of the first 3D third-person survival horror games that ever existed. And it was quite an innovator. And if it wasn't for this game, there wouldn't be no Resident Evil or Silent Hill. That's right. This game is Alone in the Dark. Developed by French developer Infogrames and created by Fred Meyer. Alone in the Dark was released on PC-DOS in 1992 and later ported to other home computers, as well as a 3DO console release in 1994. How did I discover this game in the first place? Well, back in late 1994, there was a 3DO kiosk at my local Fred Meyer. I played a demo on the 3DO that has many games to try. After trying out the 3DO at the kiosk, the demo I was fond of the most was Alone in the Dark. And it was during the 16-bit era, which was still going strong in the gaming realm. And the standalone 32-bit console like the 3DO sounded pretty ambitious for what it had to offer. But at a higher price range, made it difficult for some consumers to get into. Especially for a 12-year-old kid like myself at that time. But some people like myself had decent experience with the 3DO console as well as some of the games on that console. Especially Alone in the Dark. Now, during the time when I was 12, I was more into the 16-bit side-scrolling games and tournament fighting games. 32-bit CD-ROM gaming was still in its early stages, but previously, before I got my first CD-ROM console or add-on, I witnessed a 3DO console at the Fred Meyer kiosk with the Alone in the Dark demo, along with other games, Crash and Burn, Gex, Soccer Kid, and full-motion video games on the 3DO, including the cutscenes from the awesome CD-ROM remake of Road Rash, as well as Wing Commander 3. I first witnessed a 3DO full motion experience at a kiosk before I personally witnessed Sega CD full motion video games like Night Trap, Sewer Shark, or Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, after I traded in some stuff for the Sega CD add-on as well as some games. I was pretty damn impressed with the introduction of those CD-ROM consoles. Even though they weren't successful as the PlayStation or the Saturn or the Dreamcast, but I still got quite a kick out of them, and I always will have a special place in my heart for them. But what really stand out for me the most on the 3DO is when I played the Alone in the Dark demo. Playing a game in a 3D third-person perspective for the first time. Playing a female character, roaming around alone in the attic with no clue what I'm doing, and then once a monster came through the window, glass shatters, the music changes into a fitting tune for a survival battle. It was indeed the first time I witnessed something like this in 3D perspective. I was like, back then I never saw something like this before. Unbelievable. And it was quite a new shocking experience for me at the time. And I loved it. Sure, it may not be nothing to any gamer today since the game age, but back then it was the top of the line technology, and they were trying to move into the next level in the realm of gaming. And Alone in the Dark was not nearly as violent as Mortal Kombat was, but still the concept of what I seen in Alone in the Dark was quite new, and in somewhat way closer to a realistic life simulator. Alone in the Dark was a game I was hoping to play again one day to get more further into this survival horror adventure. Alone in the Dark was indeed an inspiration for Resident Evil, except Resident Evil has a different type of survival horror elements to it. But Alone in the Dark is one of the main reasons why I wanted to get a PlayStation for games like Resident Evil. After I seen previews in the gaming magazines for Resident Evil in late 1995 or early 96, I wanted to get a PlayStation mainly for Resident Evil, as well as other games that I witnessed during that time. Even though Resident Evil was a lot more gruesome, and it became a bigger well-known franchise for years to come, I still have to give tons of credit for Alone in the Dark for being innovators of the 3D third-person survival horror genre. And without Alone in the Dark, there wouldn't be games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. I didn't get a chance to play Alone in the Dark since that demo. That was until 1999 when I got a used 3DO console so I could play the full version of Alone in the Dark. Though the 3DO version of Alone in the Dark is dated, but the digital PC re-releases on Good Old Games or Steam look more updated and playable compared to the 3DO version. But still, I gotta give a lot of credit to the 3DO version, because playing Alone in the Dark demo on the 3DO did actually introduce me into the 3D third-person survival horror genre. Alright, now that my story on Alone in the Dark has been explained, now I must go over the game itself. And yes, I will be playing the Good Old Game version of Alone in the Dark. First of all, let's examine the front cover for Alone in the Dark. Judging from the cover, it looks like you're in for a big surprise when you play this game. The old house looks like a haunted house, with a stranger standing in front of the house with a lantern wearing a Sherlock Holmes-like attire and a derby, a possessed lightning cloud above that's like responsible for a broken tree about to fall on the house, as well as every other thing surrounding the old house. A virtual adventure game inspired by the work of H.P. Lovecraft. From the looks of the cover, it does show the game is indeed showing its faithfulness to Mr. Lovecraft. Now let's examine the goodies that came with the game. Of course, if you have the digital version, it's PDFs. Besides the instruction manual, the game came with a newspaper article from the Mystery Examiner that's dated August 25th, 1924, which has interesting fictional advertisements that blend in with the 1920s era, along with a nice article on H.P. Lovecraft himself, and the top headlines which leads to the main purpose of Alone in the Dark. Elementary. The tragic death of a well-known professional artist, Jeremy Hartwood, who hanged himself in the loft in his Dorsetto Manor home. According to Louisiana police, the death of Jeremy Hartwood was ruled as a suicide. Perhaps the report on his death may be justified, but suicide or not, I believe that there is foul play involved. Well, precisely inside the Dorsetto Manor, a curse might have had a hold on him. However, the police did not find a letter or any clue explaining Hartwood's suicide, so the motive for his suicide remains unknown until when a selected character comes to visit the manor themselves. The two selectable protagonists for Alone in the Dark, Emily Hartwood and Edward Carnby. Emily Hartwood was the niece of Jeremy Hartwood, and Edward Carnby is a private investigator. No matter what character you select, the game is completely the same all the way through the walkthrough. The only difference is the character is in between the female and the male, and each character was there on different purposes. Both were after a piano that's up in the loft, for different reasons. When you select your character, there will be a dialogue introduction for each character on why they are going to Dorsetto. I think it varies on which PC version you have between the floppy version or the updated CD-ROM version. There will be voice acting for dialogue, as well as for a book or any note you find later in the game. The voice acting does help if you don't feel like reading it yourself. Now, after you hear or read the dialogue from each character, you can tell that Edward's visit was more likely business, and Emily's visit was personal. But regardless of which character you select, there is no difference between what you do throughout the game, with the exception of the character itself. Now I'm going to do a brief walkthrough, and I think I will go with Emily Hartwood through this walkthrough.
The attorney's letter came as a deep shock to me.
As you can tell from the Mystery Examiner or the description of the game, Alone in the Dark is set in Louisiana in the mid-1920s, 1924 to be exact. After you select a character, and after you listen to what he or she has to say, then a cutscene where you're getting taxied to the manor, and then on the road, you see a frog jumping in the middle of the road eyeballing you, then the frog jumps out of the road, and then you arrive at Dorsetto. The driver takes off, the protagonist walks the path to the mansion, and you get seen from a third-story window from this creature with monster hands. And I know what this creature's thinking. We're expecting you. The window shot view had an amazing detail all around. Then you walk into the manor through the front door, and after you enter, the door slams. Then you walk upstairs into the attic, and the gameplay starts. One thing what definitely holds up for this game the most is the music. It never gets old. In fact, the soundtrack came with this game as well, so you can listen to it anytime. And the graphics look pretty damn good. for being upscaled. So there's definitely no point of going back to the 3DO version. We see the protagonist walking through the corridor to the attic, expecting the unexpected. Precisely. Hopefully, he or she, depending on which character you choose, will find what they're looking for. You know how the first part of the gameplay starting out in the attic is. Brings back Golden Age memories too. That opening cutscene was clever, and it was trying to tell the player what to expect. I already talked about the two creatures in the attic, but they are easy to deal with, if you know how to deal with them. You can either beat the crap out of them until they vanish, or if you find a shotgun before they appear, you can use it on them too. But the better way of dealing with these spirits is for the monster that jumps from the window. You can push the wardrobe right in front of the window before he tries to break through. You can push the chest over the trap door before the zombie comes through it. Very simple. What is that thing that jumps through the window anyway? Is it a zombified dog? Well, according to Alone in the Dark Wiki, it's a zombified chicken. You heard me. It's a chicken. Now, after all these years, I've been haunted by a chicken. Usually chickens run away. But this chicken goes after you. And this doesn't look like a chicken. But then again, maybe it kind of does. Well, if it is a chicken, then it was a good thing it wasn't part of Colonel Sanders' recipe. The zombified chickens and ghouls are the two most common enemy spirits in the game. The main purpose of being in the loft is to look inside the secret door to the piano for a suicide note. You will find a letter inside the piano, which is Jeremy Hartwood's last words. Now listen.
They are coming! I have freed hellish forces, and now the price must be paid. Their cetera is the prey of evil. The sun has set. They will find my body, but will not have my soul. I can imagine the master's fury and the terror in the hearts of his slaves. I hear their footsteps. Some may understand what I have done. May God forgive me. Farewell, Jeremy Hartwood.
Wow, that's some bizarre shit there. Their Seto is cursed. Indeed. So you got what you came here for. You got into the manor pretty easy, but don't expect the same when you exit the manor, because you're trapped. As I said, you're in a cursed mansion. But that doesn't mean there's no way out. You just have to find a way out. Or maybe there's more clues that you need to find before you leave. Well, I think that's what the curse is trying to tell you, if that makes any sense. So you must search through the manor thoroughly, starting in the loft, of course. You definitely need the oil lamp, the shotguns in the storage chest, and there's an Indian cover which is needed for later, and there is a book. There will be all sorts of books that you'll find throughout the mansion, and they can be interesting to read. In fact, a narrator reads it for you, and each book has different narrators, based on what type of character. They can be fun to listen to while reading, but when you're done reading a book, You may want to put it down because books will fill up your inventory.
The Myth of the Golden Fleece. Translation, Edouard de Villeban. Hesperides Publications.
Then Perseus came across Ichios, who had been turned into stone. He spoke to his companions and said, "Beware of the Medusa."
That's all there is in the loft. Now let's move on to the next room. Which is the third floor storeroom area, where you'll find a bow and an oil can. Which the oil can be used to fill up your oil lamp, and once you fill up the lamp, the empty can will remain in your inventory until you drop it or get rid of it. Yeah, items that become useless after using them still remain in your inventory. They don't automatically discard like they do in Resident Evil. Items like empty oil cans, empty medicine containers, empty flash bottles, empty boxes, used keys, and books after reading them, you totally want to drop them somewhere where they're not in your pathway when backtracking. And you will be doing quite a bit of backtracking. Now entering the third floor corridor. Now we've seen the protagonist enter the storeroom to the loft from the hallway. But when you try to exit from the storeroom through the hallway the same way you came in, look what happens. How are we going to get across now? Well, there are only 2 doors on each side, and we can only go through 1 door on each side from this side. You will also find a saber sword, but it will break when using it. But the good thing about this blade, even the half-cut blade, is still useful, but also the saber sword is needed for something else later in the game, even if it's broken. Of course, there is also another way to get around to the opposite side of the loose board, is that you go through one of the doors that leads to another room after you deal with the same creatures again. Once you make it through to the opposite side of the loose board, move to the next area. And as you notice, the exit through stairs, the way you came in, is now being guarded by night gaunts. Which, the only way to deal with these night gaunts is that if you have mirrors, one for each side, you just put one on each statue, and then they will disappear. And then you're done with the third floor. Now time to move downstairs. But once you get downstairs, don't bother on trying to leave just yet. Because the creature of the threshold that awaits you if you try to leave. To put it another way, as I already mentioned, you're trapped. Or perhaps there's still more work to be done. And there's only one way to destroy this statue spirit, which will have to come a little later. Until then, avoid touching it. There is only one way out of their Seto, and that's destroy the mastermind ghost, Ezekiel Prey. From this point on, after you're done with everything on the third floor, there will be quite a few moments, and sometimes unpleasant moments, where you have to backtrack between the second floor and the first floor, until you explore quite enough to enter the underground caves through the basement. Let's examine the remaining walkthrough for Alone in the Dark by watching a montage of my gameplay, as well as explaining my favorite moments of the game as we move on. Of course, I already explained to you about my memories about the beginning a bunch of times. Of course, those will always be my memories that I remember going back to my youth and playing for the first time on the demo, especially after my death scene as well. And while we're here, I want to explain one thing you want to avoid doing is touching any form of standing ghost, or sitting ghost, stalling, or moving. Because once you do, the screen shambles everywhere you go, as well as the ghost turns into a bunch of orbs. Once the ghost of orbs touches you, you're dead. Majority of the types of deaths you get, you will see this cutscene where this zombie drags you through the underground caves to the altar, letting you know that you've been defeated. Definitely one creepy moment I remember when I was a kid. The music as well is quite fitting. And my body sacrificed to altar, and then the Cthulhu screen comes up. That Cthulhu ending screen is something. Of course, you see that screen no matter how you get defeated. The cutscene where your body gets dragged to the altar. Another unpleasant moment is when you enter a courtyard to get arrows that are hidden behind the statue, which you can't see. And after you get the arrows, a bunch of spiders out of nowhere comes down to bite you. And they will bite your ass repeatedly once they get a hold of you. After you get the arrows, you just run to get the hell out of there and don't re-enter that room again. There will be alternative ways to get around to the other side, if needed. Another moment where you enter the sitting room where you have to get the gramophone and the matches. You'll also see another ghost sitting in that chair. Of course, same as before, as I mentioned, if you touch a ghost will come after you. So like I said before, avoid touching any ghost. And here's one best moment. Once you get the actual sword, and not that saber sword, the broken one, once you get the actual sword from that statue, you get to fight off Ezekiel Priggs. I know it sounds a little too early to do, but you have to fight him in the sword duel. That's the only way how you can defeat him is with that sword. But watch your ass though, because he's got some tricks up his sleeve. And I think this duel scene's pretty interesting, to say at least, once you got the proper camera angle. It can be challenging, and it does take practice. Of course, you definitely want to save before you fight him. Otherwise, you get your ass handed to. It's best to have good health when you fight him, so best to replenish your health the proper way, and practically replenish your health after your duels finish. Of course, depending on if he gets any hits on you. But he can be easy once you get the pattern down. Well, I haven't got the pattern down fully, so I just keep swinging my sword at him and push him into the corner after numerous attempts. It's definitely an interesting battle, to say the least. Now, no other weapons can work against him, just the sword. I tried the shotgun on him, I tried the pistol on him, and none of those didn't work. After all, he's a ghost, and sometimes enemies have to be killed with the proper weapon. You do eventually get around to defeating the ghost of Ezekiel. That's just a human form of Ezekiel. The spirit lives down below. Of course, the sword is still useful after the battle too, so you can use it any time, so it will never break like the saber did. Now let's get down below and finish off Ezekiel's spirit once and for all. Another favorite thing about Alone in the Dark is the gramophone. You can actually put it down anywhere if you have the record. Of course, there's 3 records in the game. If you have a record, you can listen to the music anytime you want, or put it down to a nearest room, and you can still listen to it when you're entering another room. But mainly the purpose of the record player is for the dance hallway, because once you start, if you have the right record, you can have all 3 of the couples dance, but still you want to avoid touching them. But why do you want to make them dance? Well, not because it looks like a beautiful scenery, but you want to get behind the fireplace to get that key, which you're going to need. You know, it's really interesting that all 3 of the records have decent quality sounds, like the Saint Sohn's Dance of Death. And after you get the key from the fireplace and when you read the room, the ghost, the dancing ghost will vanish. And once you re-enter, they're all gone. You know, I would like to have this dance with my Tiffany doll. Or should I say Tiffany spirit. Let's hit it. Okay, now that our dancing's done and over with, since it's the only time we probably will be dancing in this hall, let's get back to work now. Now, before entering the basement, or should I say the underground caves, definitely one thing you need is the talisman. And there's one evil book you must avoid reading. It's by Ludwig Bren.
Ludwig Prien. De vermis mysteriis. Nomine invocatoris, si non sanctificatus es, cave. De vermis mysteriis non absolvo folem legendum, fatum et eum versus. Tibi magnum inominandum signa stellarum nigrarum et
Oh shit. Now entering the underground. You must be prepared, of course, because once you enter, it's most likely you cannot turn back. In these underground caves, you will run across another familiar Cthulhu creature, which is the Cthulhu worm, as well as run into another zombified chicken. I believe this is the last encounter with a zombified chicken. As well as a big, easy to deal with rat. Yeah, sometimes enemies are easier to deal with than they look. And there's something I forgot to tell you. The rats in the wine cellar, for some reason, they cannot be killed. There will be other creatures in the caves, like these vulture-like critters when you're doing the jumping platform. And these creatures from the Black Lagoon creatures called the Deep Ones, which are hiding underwater. You don't want to get into any form of water, because your cartridge shells for your shotgun will get wet. And the lamp will go off. Of course, you can always unlit that, but I'm not sure if the shotgun shells are going to be any use after that. These deep ones look like the creature from the Black Lagoon. You will definitely use your lantern a lot when you're going into underground caves. You might have destroyed the pirate form of Ezekiel Grace, but the spirit lives in that tree, and you must destroy it. With that talisman. Well, that's actually step one. On that pedestal, which you would normally be dragged to once you're dead, or if you die. Depends on how you die, of course. Once you get the talisman on that pedestal, the next thing you want to do is use your lantern and throw it at the tree. And then the curse of Ezekiel has been defeated, along with all the other monsters surrounding it. Since you destroyed the curse, next thing you do is get the hell out of Deserta Manor. Oh, at last. Finally glad to be out of there. Now, let's wait for our driver and let's get the hell out of here. Here he comes. Let's get in. Driver, are you okay? Oh my gosh! Obviously, as long as the driver does his job, I'm fine. The end. Now we're just about there. Alone in the Dark was such an innovative game in 1992, and it was a big success. But how well does Alone in the Dark stand out as of today? Well, so many of you can tell that this game aged with these polygon-shaped characters. The controls are also dated, and the character movement in every aspect is so out of place for the standards of today. You know what I find odd about Alone in the Dark compared to many other games on home computers, especially around that time? It is normal for a keyboard to be used as a default device for a game, and it also should have many keys for each action, but for Alone in the Dark, it's not like that. For every action, no matter if you're searching or defending yourself, should be an ease of one button, like many other games. But in Alone in the Dark, you have to go to inventory screen to change from action to exam to pick up. And I find that a complete waste of time. It should have been simple. Now I know they do something like this for point-and-click adventures, but this is a 3D adventure. Or maybe I'm just nitpicking. Now with the character movements. The walking cycle is okay, but when you try to run, you have to press the forward movement key twice. And that can be a pain sometimes, because it doesn't always want to work. At least not for me. Now with the fighting mechanics. When using your feet or fists, or using a sword or a knife, are so delayed. But they do work on some enemies, if at a proper camera angle. Now with the shooting mechanics. Bow and arrow, revolver, or shotgun are also slow. And depending on what camera angle, it can be difficult to see where you're aiming at. There is no auto-aim, and unlike Resident Evil games, Alone in the Dark has limited ammo, and these weapons don't work against all creatures either. In fact, some creatures you can't even kill in defense at all. You just have to avoid these creatures as much as you can. But at least the bow and arrow are used for one purpose only in the game. Now that's a big fucking worm. There will be a time later in the game where you'll have to be doing some jumping, like jump across a gap or jump from a pillar to a pillar, and that's when the jumping action becomes available. And when it comes to jumping across something, especially from a pillar to another pillar to another pillar, and with these camera angles, you definitely want to save your game after each jump. Well, you actually want to save your game frequently on Alone in the Dark regardless. And that's a good thing about Alone in the Dark, is you can save your game at any time, anywhere. Yeah, saving your game frequently is a recommended thing to do in Alone in the Dark, because anything can and will happen. The camera angles are not always reliable, especially in inconvenient moments. And similar to what I already mentioned, action during combat or when using a gun or a bow, you have to be precise with your aiming. Oh, and another reason why you should save your game always is because you can die at some points of the game without warning. For instance, death traps, bridges falling out from under you, if you don't run when you have to, touching a ghost is instant death, reading one book can be deadly, a threshold will eat you up if you try to retreat, and you definitely want to make sure you get everything done on all 3 floors and make sure you have everything you need before you move on through the basement and the caves. Because if you mess up, or didn't save before you enter the basement, there's a good chance that you'll have to start your game all over again. Which that happened to me a few times. Let's don't go too hard on the hiccups for Alone in the Dark, because it's a 32-year-old game, and even back then it still had some flaws that I already addressed. But Alone in the Dark is still a masterpiece, and it's one of the first 3D third-person survival horror adventure. Alone in the Dark was quite impressive for its time, despite its dated graphics and delayed character movements, but in ways, the game still holds up. Oh my god! Tiffany! Don't tell me I'm seeing things. Okay, I guess I am seeing things. I'm beginning to wonder myself that Dersetto is having an exercise on my mind as well. And especially after all those years. Especially when I revisit the memories of this game, it comes back to haunt me as well. And it's trying to haunt me through my Tiffany doll. Okay, let's get back on track. This game still does hold up, even if it comes back to haunt you the more you revisit. I'm glad I revisit it, especially for you all, as well as telling my side of the story on how I discovered this game in the first place. And if it wasn't for Alone in the Dark, there wouldn't be Resident Evil or Silent Hill. The music score for Alone in the Dark is phenomenal. And that's another perk for the Good Old Games version. It comes with a digital MP3 soundtrack. I think Steam does have the soundtrack too, if you purchase the game. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, because I don't have the Steam version. The music, as well as the sound effects for Alone in the Dark, fits quite in with the survival horror atmosphere. And to be fair, that's what holds up for me the most for Alone in the Dark, is the music score. The story for Alone in the Dark was based off Cthulhu mythos, and Infogrames nailed it. Alone in the Dark may be a direct inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft, but Alone in the Dark was also showing some love for Edgar Allan Poe's House of Usher. Back in 1992, Alone in the Dark was considered to be the best horror game of the year. In a way, it's kind of debatable. There were other games released that year like Waxworks or Splatterhouse 2, and a full motion video game, Night Trap, which was actually filmed in 1987. But in a way, Alone in the Dark was a nominee that deserves to be up there, or perhaps at number 1 for the best horror game of 1992. And after 32 years, Alone in the Dark still holds up to me on most aspects. Alone in the Dark was successful enough to spawn a few sequels, a new Nightmare, a reboot, and lately a 2004 remake that looks faithful to the original 1992 game. Now, where does the series go from here, as far as protagonists goes? Well, there are a few reasons why I chose Emily Hartwood the most for the first game, because of my history with the game, and playing a female character for a role like this, especially when you mess up, makes the game more twisted. And that's what I like about it. Plus, Emily's story of visiting Dersetto sounds more convincing than it does for Edward with his story. And this is the only game in the series that you can play as Emily, with the exception of the 2024 remake. From that point on in the series, Edward Carnby was the chosen one to be the main face in the Alone in the Dark series. Which, in a way, between the two, it actually makes sense to choose Edward Carnby, because Edward Carnby is a private investigator or a paranormal detective, and he's quite fearless. Well, that wraps everything up about Alone in the Dark. Very awesome game indeed, even though it's dated in somewhat ways, but I still enjoy revisiting it. But now it's time for Dixon and Tiffany Spirit to lead Dersetto. We shall not return. Until the 2004 remake, that is, once I get to that. But first I must go into the other dark mysteries in the Alone in the Dark franchise before then. Until then, thank you all very much for watching and listening. This is your host and creator, Jason Dixon, of the Ultimate Gaming Realm, and Tiffany Spirit, logging off. Whew, now that nightmare's over, I think it's time that we both celebrate, baby. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, the show's over. Now please, scram!